ask me for anything. Got it. Okay.
So thank you very much, Keith, for coming. It's really an honor to have you here. And I just want to say that David would be amazingly, really happy that you come. And yeah, so I'm forwarding to Andres now.
Not Steve.
Sorry, I think we will start with Steve, and
Steve,
then I will
yes.
come in.
Steve Bachelor, please.
Okay.
Over.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll start. Just like what Nika was saying, it's truly an honor to be able to introduce Professor Keith Hart, who I like to think of as the man who saved David Graeber from the United States of America, and more specifically from Yale University, because he helped bring him across the pond and set him up with a position at Goldsmiths, where he was able to continue with his overtly political project that was much too political for the academy in this country, the way he was blacklisted out of higher education. So, I mean, in many ways, we have Professor Hart to thank for David Graeber's continued productivity. And I wanted to talk just for a moment about the connections between the two, both personal and intellectual. The personal I've sort of established. Keith Hart has published a very informative obituary that he wrote for David, where he talks about coming into contact through a shared familiarity with Marcel Maus's work, and the beginnings of what was a very fruitful intellectual collaboration that he mentions, that there were some sort of political grumblings that kind of interfered, but that really he considered David to be his fiercest intellectual companion and interlocutor. There are so many areas where their work resonates, where the connection that David made is so profound and so rich, be it from Keith Hart's ideas about how money is constituted, how it's a memory bank, to the idea about human economy, that in order to really think about economies, we have to think of these as human systems. And that's what really, I think, connects their work, is their assertion from the start that all anthropology is inherently political, because all human action is inherently political. What I especially love about Keith Hart's own work is that he, like David, has shown the errors of the ways that anthropologists took into turning anthropology into a discipline connected to the bureaucratizing regime that is modernism. And so anthropology became complicit in its own colonial project, and that nonetheless, anthropology, when used appropriately and personally rather than impersonally, that it's able to really make the kinds of epiphanies and revelations that David has so famously said, once you've seen them, there's no really unseeing them. And so we have Keith Hart to thank for helping David see these important epiphanies, and helping be one of the many giants who led David to believe that scholarship is anything but the monastic self. It really is the collective unconscious of the collective mind being played out in these materialized ways. I want to now hand it over to Andres, who's going to continue.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for this introduction and for contextualizing the relationship Professor Keith Hart and David Graeber. And I would just like to sort of introduce myself as well, and to inform that I don't belong to the field of anthropology, and I've happened and encountered David in a very particular way, and especially in 2020 when he passed away. We met with Nika in Venice, where I was living at the time, and then ever since I was involved in the events of the Museum of Care, and I keep on returning and contributing with great pleasure. And always it's a context where you can encounter new people, new ideas, and which sort of continues a legacy of David Graeber in this online format for the moment. Last year, together with my colleagues from Milan during the pandemic, my students actually, we invented a fake department within the school where I teach, which was called Critical Studies Department. And together with the students, we started to reflect upon the issues that we're dealing with education. And we created this kind of interesting independent learning, research and networking platform and tool for students that everyone was able to use. And we were invited to curate a project within the Museum of Care, which was entitled Education and Anti-Institutions. And with this talk, we would also launch the continuation of this project and the program of 2022 and 23. I'm very happy that this is once again hosted by the Museum of Care. And I think the idea of hosting is something that some of my colleagues, curators, have been using, this idea of para-hosting. So I hope Museum of Care will also become a kind of para-hosting institution, hosting different kind of interesting experiences. I'm very delighted and a little bit nervous as well to have the chance to present Keith Hart, who is an illustrious and very prominent and fantastic first guest. I'm very happy to do that actually, and then I was very, very delighted and happy to read your book and to really follow that particularly fascinating story. So it would be very difficult to give a sort of a short biography of Keith Hart, because it goes, or it exceeds all kind of conventions. I can say just that Keith Hart is now recognized as an anthropologist, but he comes from the background of classical studies, as we heard in the very, very beginning when we were chatting. Then he has lived in 24 different countries. He has done a lot of different field work, starting from Ghana, where Keith has done a field work on informal economies, and as he claims, he has become a smuggler himself. He's been a gambler, consultant, a self-taught economist, Marxist for a while, and I could continue and go on and go on. Continue really with this very kind of unconventional and unorthodox biography. Due to his numerous places where Keith has lived, he frequently sort of self-denominates or self-defines himself to be a nomad, at least in his early career. And then most recently, he is grounded in Paris, France, and in Durban in South Africa. He continues to focus on his writing. He's still lecturing, and among many places also in London, the London School of Economics. We will talk today about most recent project, or the book Self in the World, Connecting Life's Extremes. And I have prepared two little questions and a little quote before maybe we can start from here. Keith Hart is also known for having coined different terms or different kind of concepts, that of informal economy and human economy. You've contributed also on and created this idea of memory bank. You've contributed on money and many kind of interdisciplinary terms that you have invented. And once I remember in Milan, Marc Auger was saying that it is important, like he coined the term which was called known places or no places. And he said he just mentioned the symptom that he sort of detected in the social dimension, and he just named it at the right time. So I was wondering how, and today's presentation's title is Lifelong Self-Learning and Modern Education. So that's where we return to education, like you have contributed in many subjects. I was interested how you came to this, and then in your book, Self in the World, Connecting Life's Extremes, it is a very particular autobiographical work that sort of, it is a travel from the Manchester where you come from up to the place and where you find yourself today, not just like geographically, but also mentally. It is also a kind of declaration and actually illustration of all the references, all intellectual kind of contaminations of your particular path. And I would maybe like to open you in your book, in the introduction, you say that most anthropologists discover the world by finding out what people do and think, where they live. I rely mainly on lifelong learning through reading, writing, and varied work experience that includes eclectic immersion in high and low culture. I combine auto-ethnography with world history and humanist philosophy. I teach what I have learned, and I learn from teaching. So maybe we can start from there, and then I have prepared some other quotes, and maybe then we could sort of continue this dialogue afterwards. And I remember that in a recent, or not so recent, lecture at the Goldsmiths, you also said that you see yourself engaged in discussion of how to make this world a better place, which is a discussion that is going on at least for the last 1,000 years, and that has many very prominent kind of participants. So can we speak about your book? And I would pass the floor to you, Keith. And sorry if the introduction has been too long or too confused, but I hope we can start from here and really revisit what your latest book speaks about.
Thank you. Well, I can't start my lecture by answering your questions because that wasn't where I planned to start. But I just want to say that, to pick up something that Stephen pointed out, that as I said in my obituary, that the relationship I had with David is quite greater in my life than any other. And it lasted for 15 or 16 years. And when he died, it took me quite a while to recover because we fell out when I had a 3-year appointment to LSE. When I was actually getting treatment for cancer and still trying to lecture, and there was a strike, and I asked everybody, is this real? Is it important? And almost everybody said, oh no, nobody cares about this strike. It's just a formality. So I gave my lecture, and David then broadcast around the internet that I was a scab. And I found it pretty hard to accept this as a gesture of friendship. He said, I come from a union family. And I said, well, I come from a family where you don't trash your friends. So that led to a certain estrangement. And of course, when he died, I just was shattered by the thought that this wonderful relationship we had for so long and learned so much from each of us. I mean, I don't think you could count, who got more out of it. I mean, I don't know how much he got out of it. I know it was quite a lot, and I know that it was the absolute making of my new life after I moved to Paris away from Cambridge and had no institutional support. And David was my institutional support. And it's so common. It's like family, really. You end up, slagging somebody off over the Sunday dinner and not talking to them for 10 years or something like that. And that's what I had to come with, that I'd wasted, several years not continuing this relationship. So it was and is the most important intellectual relationship that I had. And it actually provided the means of adjusting to a situation in which I had no institutional existence, living in a country that didn't want to know me. And David was my principle of support and continuity in that period. Okay, so my title, Self in the World, and subtitle, Connecting Life's Extremes, comes from the fact that I think we learn in the social sciences, especially, how we're all divided and separated. We're separated by race and religion and class and gender and nation and God knows how many other ways. And it's true that these divisions, these socially institutional divisions, mediate between ourselves and the world we live in. They are, the way we connect with it most of the time. But, I think in the process, we never discuss what is the self and what is the world. I mean, never mind how can we make a relationship between the two? And I think this is, and so that's what I'm trying to do, is to reinvent something like the golden mean of the Greeks, which is to say, if you have, dialectical pairs like right and wrong and true and false and all the rest of it, it's really dangerous and bad to get stuck on one pole of the pair and ignore or negate the other. You have to find the best combination of them that suits you and your political and personal purposes. So, I mean, that's, in fact, the African novelist Chinua Achebe, in his probably greatest novel, Things Fall Apart, and where he actually has an autobiography called A British Protected Child, the education of a British, and he says that the Igbo, his people, seek the middle ground always, which is the same idea as the old Greek one. And the poles are basically inhabited by the fanatics and who deny our humanity that we find in the middle ground, in particular combinations, perhaps opportunistic or principled, but they always involve both sides. And so what I wanted to do was to write about how I suggested that, that we enter two journeys in our life, out into the world and into the self. And of course they're related, they're actually completely interdependent, but we lack much in the way of education for building up our own version of how they're connected. And and I wrote my book really with readers in mind to, I knew that my readers would be of many different kinds, some more academic, some with no academic training at all. And, so I wrote it, and in the introduction explained that I don't expect you to read this from start to the end. I mean, some of you will be more interested in the more kind of intellectual part.
You just went mute, Keith.
Yeah, you just
Waving my hands. I always wave my hands too much. So, you know, I mean, I wrote 9 versions of this book in 5 years. And every time I wrote another one, it was because I hadn't resolved the synthesis of the pairs that I was trying to connect effectively to an audience as dispersed and wide as I hoped for. Okay, my main argument is that humanity, that being human is not written into our DNA. It's something that we have to become if we can, or but the unequal society, which essentially is synonymous with the last 5,000 years of human history, and ours is a particularly unpleasant version of it. Unequal society means that we are alienated from our humanity, from the world, from each other, and even from ourselves. We feel puny, isolated, self in a vast, unknowable and universe. And, you know, the result is, you know, as a result of living in an unequal society of any kind, you know, the racist empire or capitalist class systems or whatever, or gender antagonism, we are in fact inevitably part human and not wholly human. So it's really a bit of a stretch to claim that we're already human. We are neither individually yet human, nor have we yet as a collective, as humanity, discovered the means of being human. And in my view, you know, we can only aspire to be human if self and society, or self and the world, reinforce each other. And there are societies that have achieved this more effectively than ours, but I know that most of my readers are going to be trapped in the in a form of alienation that they don't understand, which is why, if I say David is my has been my most powerful interlocutor, there is no one in all my reading who has given me as much as Marx, you know, because that's his question. You know, we live in societies where money buys the machines and dominates the people through both of these. And we need to reverse it so that people, you know, have machines that work for them. And if necessary, the money they need to achieve what they want, you know, that, but we're still, you know, very far from achieving forms of society. And I'm convinced, you know, that our bureaucratized university education makes it impossible for us to even understand the world, never mind feel like belonging to it. In fact, most people are and many and more people all the time want to escape from a world that they feel is a threat to them. So this is more or less the motivation for writing the book the way that I did. And of course, at the center of it, especially if I'm thinking about individual readers rather than, you know, social organization and so on. I mean, I have to, you know, I have to make it possible for individuals through my book in ways that reflect them, not me, can perhaps begin answering for themselves some of the questions that I have raised for myself. I offer my life story and what I think I've learned about the world in a way that I hope will be a resource, you know, and so learning from my book is the point of the book. So education is, and of course I have learned more than from any other exercise what I wanted to find out. I mean, this book, I mean, every major book that I've written kind of colonizes the existential soup in which just swirls around me in an unformed way, brings it out, not just for other people, but more than anybody else, for me. You know, when I wrote The Memory Bank, you know, I felt that I colonized 10% of the soup. I brought it out. And the question, I believe, that my book, the point of education and my emphasis on lifelong self-learning is how can we resist alienation? And the people that I have learned most from are people who believe that despite the terrible handicaps under which people have always lived, there is a redemptive possibility. I mean, when, you know, Fanon can say, you know, I believe that people who have been enslaved and colonized can actually get rid of it and make something of their own, you know, and so did Marx. That was, and Engels, that was the whole point. And I don't think anthropologists, except, you know, a few individuals, of which David, I think, has been the most successful, even pose this question anymore. Okay. So the centrality of education, and especially of self-learning, is if not, you know, explicitly the theme of the book. It's something that I approach again in the last chapter to try and bring together, you know, what I think, how I think I can do that. But also in, you know, I mean, I've learned from many sources. I've learned from a really amazing collection of people who wrote about themselves in the last 500 years. And I've learned especially from the 18th century Enlightenment, from Vico and Rousseau and Kant, and from some of the great founders of the modernist period, like Rivers and Marcel Mauss. But the people I've learned most from in the last 30 years or so are the anti-colonial intellectuals. I mean, these people, I deal specifically with three Pan-Africanists, Du Bois, James, and Fanon, and Gandhi, who I know is going through a bad patch in terms of public esteem at the moment, especially in India and South Africa. But you know, my attitude to reading is you take out of somebody's life and what you want. The point about the anti-colonial intellectuals, and I think Gandhi was the greatest of them in a practical sense, is that they have to imagine a post-racial imperialist society. We have to create a notion, think of another world which is not racist and not imperial. And then they have to arrange for the masses to fight for it. But also they have to show them that if they're going to fight effectively, they have to re-educate themselves. So that all the greatest of these intellectuals were very concerned with helping people to define their own place in the revolution. As well as articulating what it was for and how, you know, the mass of Indian peasants could somehow get their act together to achieve it and get the British out. You know, so the anti-colonial intellectuals, and especially the people that I've just mentioned, It seems to me, I mean, in my view, the anti-colonial revolution was the most important event of the 20th century. It was catalyzed by 2 world wars, and it was the means through which people brought into a European-dominated world society against their will in the 19th century, asserted their right to establish their own relationship to it in the 20th. As far as I'm concerned, there is nothing else that we achieved in that century, which was in fact a pretty terrible one, than that. So this is, you know, I mean, I think we need to know where to look, you know, in order to learn, not by book, you know, it's a small thing, but I mean, who should, you know, who are the people who really made a difference in this struggle should we read, and why? And that's partly what my book is about. And I want to point people to a whole range of inspirations for a better world who actually did something, so you can find out from seeing what they did and how and thought, you know, and maybe you can connect with that in new ways that help you to feel more confident about your part of this historical process. So that's my, how long have I gone, by the way? I mean, how long have I got left?
No, I think yeah, we can go on. It's 7:37, so it's quite
No,
good.
I mean, I don't want to know. I know the time. I want to know, you know, when you're going to start waving your flag saying, shut up.
At least 10 minutes more.
10 minutes.
At least.
Oh, come on. Okay. All right. Okay, so what is modern education? It's based on 2 principles, which is what I call the hose and bucket, which is forget who you are, forget that you might even bring anything that you already know into this process. We're just going to, you know, fill your bucket with, you know, with the hose that we control. And as a result of this, you will, you know, be a good passive worker, consumer, and citizen for the rest of your life. You know, because the point of education is to keep people quiet, right? I mean, even schooling isn't. I mean, and during the pandemic, I kept asking myself, is schooling, you know, to teach kids or just to allow parents to work? And you know, I mean, so you know, we have to kind of. So that's the first thing. I mean, it's the denial of self, of person. And in organizations which basically there to suit the teachers, not the students, and to turn students into, you know, fragmented and narrow and passive subjects. The second, the most, you know, is the, I mean, which I think is incredibly crazy, is what Paulo Freire called the banking system of school, which is that you're supposed to get your education before you're even a grown-up. And that's supposed to do you throughout the time that you're a grown-up. But the worst thing of all is that in our capitalist education systems, bureaucratic capitalism, you might say, kids are brought up believing that they're in an endless competition with people of their own age. And that, you know, I mean, you know, they must always compare themselves or will be compared in ways, you know, that suggest whether they're going to win or not. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. I mean, in Ghana, you know, in the countryside, you might have a compound with 50 kids and they're all out underneath the baobab tree, and you know, a 3-year-old will play with an 8-year-old, and and the 8-year-old can behave like a baby, and you know, and the kid, the baby can think about what it might be like to be an adult. But I mean, there's never any sense, you know, that a cohort of people, all age 7, are in some deadly race for survival. It's just awful. Now, I've argued that universities committed as part of the modern revolution at the beginning of the last century to bureaucratize capitalism, and that's what makes modern education modern. It's the idea that people, their knowledge should be fragmented into narrow compartments, and the longer they are given education, the narrower the compartments and the inability that they develop to connect with anything outside it. What I don't want to, I mean, I think it would be utopian to suggest that we should dispense with existing formal education, and that everything should be like, you know, working class autodidacts, who in fact I've learned a great deal from, and who would put most academics to shame. They just, you know, I mean, David always used to say, the academics don't read his footnotes. The only people he hears from about them are working class autodidacts who actually read the footnotes. The academics are too busy to read the footnotes. They just want to get on the essays tomorrow.
Keith, unmute yourself. You muted.
What I'm saying is that I want to see how informal self-learning can win more space in systems of formal education. And as a teacher in such a system, that's all I can aspire to as a teacher, is to give them that space. And so the idea is that, you know, that we don't get enough space for informal and personal learning in existing systems of formal education. And there are various ways that I've tried to deal with this, which is, for example, improvising. It turns it into a kind of performance that they can relate to more easily than some guy reading from a text, because he's just desperate to make sure that he says every word he planned to say. And you know, they end up, you know, sort of writing notes, and there's no human connection at all in most lectures. Especially, you know, I remember when I was at Goldsmiths, you know, I used to improvise my lectures, and I would put up a PowerPoint. No, I didn't have a PowerPoint. And once this girl on the front row suddenly jumped up and put her hand up, and she said, I get it, I get it. Instead of us just copying down the points in a PowerPoint, we have to listen to you and figure out what you're saying. It was brilliant. I mean, you know, it's like confirmation of a lifetime's effort. But in the lectures themselves, I never just teach the books. I teach the people who wrote the books, their life history, their politics, the historical circumstances, because, you know, I think, you know, we can't just say, go and read, you know, chapter 1 of Capital. You know, we have to, I mean, there's not, I mean, you know, a kid who's 18 can't connect with a dead book as being something like himself, you know. So, but I think if you say, you know, well, Max Weber was doing this and this was the situation and so on, at least he can begin to think that this person was not as alien to me as I thought, and maybe, you know, I could do something like that myself. I mean, you got to, that was, So I think what I'm trying to say is that we can, and I mean, I used to tell them, you know, look, if you've read the same paragraph 3 times, ditch the book because you can't make sense of it. Read something that you like, or that you can, it seems more readily accessible to you. Because I believe, you know, that our history of life and of reading, you know, is essential to the sense that we can make of any given book. In fact, I think that reading is more creative than writing, although we're told instantly to defer, always to defer to writers, because writers repeat themselves, they get into a groove and don't get out of it. And but every reader who reads what they've written brings an entirely different personal history of experience and reading to that text. And it's through how readers interpret text that culture evolves. You know, I mean, sometimes the readers are themselves writers, and we can see, you know, but that, you know, what we've got to think of is a system of education in which people understand that they are the agents of their own education, and that what they've done so far will affect what they can read. I mean, you know, the 2 most important people in my life, apart from C.L.R. James, who I met very late, were Marx and Mauss, as they were in some sense for David also. But, you know, I read Marx, tried to read Capital Volume 1 4 times between the ages of 19 and 35. And I only managed to get the message. I think it's a very difficult book, actually, because he's playing all kinds of political games in it that most ordinary readers wouldn't possibly figure out. But the next weekend, I read Moses the Gift that I also couldn't make any sense of. And I read it through my knowledge of Marx and wrote 25 pages of notes in a weekend. And the 2 have been joined at the hip for me for the rest of my life. Now, you know, so these personal histories of reading affect what you can get something out of. But people, you know, teachers say, you're going to read this week, you know, write an essay on it. And somebody finds they can't really make much sense of it, and they, you know, they feel a failure. And I say, look, you know, let's keep it loose. You know, if you can't make headway with this, you're not ready for it. There will be another time. It's not your fault. But find something, you know, that you can connect with. Okay. So in the book, I offer my own experience and what I've learned about the world, in the hope that it could be a practical basis for learning and living in ways that are, you know, individual, people's own way. The only book I've written like it was The Memory Bank. And I mean, I actually have an audience, I mean, an essay on the back burner called Death of the Audience, which is a riposte to Roland Barthes' Death of the Author. I don't believe in the death of the author, but I certainly believe in the death of the audience. You can't predict anymore. It's like, you know, cable TV, you know, you can't just say, well, I know that all my neighbors will have watched Coronation Street tonight. So, you know, this always happens, and now it's happened with about 10 seconds to go. I lost the thread. Okay, so this is why I think that, you know, we have to give far more prominence to self-learning. I think that the digital revolution, even though it's organized by big tech, who need to be subjected to antitrust legislation like Rockefeller and IT&T, nevertheless, as a medium, it is universal, and the collapse of time and space constraints on social interaction, make it something that we can participate in with a sense of being an agent more than just a recipient or a consumer. And that's really the message I hope to communicate in my book.
All right. So thank you so much. I was curious if you could maybe now, if you could answer several questions, and if there are some comments, then they are most welcome. And thank you for this kind of introduction. And I was just curiosity, maybe I could pose the first question. I'm really kind of enthralled by this notion of lifelong self-learning. And I remember being in Boston and encountering Mel King, who is an activist. And Mel King is a self-taught activist. Let's say he comes from civil rights fights and so on and so forth, and the 10th city in Boston. When he was giving a talk, and together with certain people from the field of visual arts and activists, he was speaking about the same issues that these very educated, let's say, Western people, in a very kind of authentic way, because he had gained that knowledge from his practice. So we recently hear a lot of also people suggesting that we should kind of re-educate ourselves, or we should unlearn certain things. Do you believe that we can unlearn, or maybe this like self-learning is a way how you could construct an alternative kind of puzzle or path, rather than just kind of, I'm sorry, there's a background noise. Someone has switched on the microphone. It just disturbs me a bit. Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so how would you say, like, what are the possibilities? How can we get to this informal self-learning? Is it the more kind of experiential path, or can you realize it also if you are within the academic setting? So could you maybe elaborate a little? I understood how it's very clear how you illustrate that in the book, but if we think about the younger generations today, like what could you suggest, let's say, because sometimes the academia, as you said, it is exactly the place where any kind of enthusiasm sort of ends, rather than.
Well, I mean, like Vico and Rousseau, I believe that the adults are the problem, and that not the children. I mean, Rousseau says at one stage that that the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy want their children to grow up as fast as possible. They don't really want them to be children at all. And he said, but, they need the time to develop in their own way. What they learn in the playground on their own account is worth far more to their development than what they learn in the classroom. And, I have been betting all my life, and it's been a major part of my self-education. I mean, I started when I was 12, betting on the horses. And now, I have £500,000 riding on the world markets for finance. And I spend most of my time staring at the foreign exchange rate tables of the Financial Times. But I can tell you that I learn more about the world economy by risking my own money in it than by anything that I read. And so, but this is an attitude I think I developed very early. And Andres mentioned, I mean, one thing I believe is, you've got to get rid of negation in your thinking, certainly as a method of escaping from these problems. If you start by negating something, what you are negating becomes part of how you contrive what you think of as positive. So I never lecture on what I don't like. I only lecture on stuff that I can, be enthusiastic about, because I want these students to feel that it's possible to be, to be enthusiastic about a dead book. So I mean, I have a section of a chapter called Resisting Alienation, because I believe that another way of expressing what I mean is that, resisting alienation has to be more powerful than alienation itself. And there are ways of getting, the means of resisting alienation, which include, reading Marx. But I think the important thing is to recognize always that, yes, I mean, it's important to understand what you're getting, why you don't like what you're getting. But you shouldn't, consciously seek to negate it and try to develop some other way, because, I mean, it really is a terrible thing. I mean, people don't understand how, and I really think it affects the left. I mean, if you want to find, free marketeers in this society, you'll find people on the left upholding it more than anybody else, because they think that's what they have to negate. But, there isn't any such thing as a free market out there. It's just an ideological slogan of the capitalists. But a lot of left people, left wingers, think they have to build a solidarity economy, or, a non-capitalist alternative, or whatever. I think the left has especially since the millennium, has more or less committed suicide. It certainly has almost no palpable political agenda that makes a difference to anything. I mean, look, I live in France. Three of the candidates for the presidency were xenophobic autocrats. There was no, anyway. So that's.
Can I pose a question?
Yeah.
How could you break down Marx's either his life or his works based on that distinction you just drew between the negation? Because, and maybe this is only what's happened in the last 20 years, like you're saying, but don't we always think of Marx and his thought as a negation of capitalism? I mean, his work was called Capital. So I would be so curious to see you connect Marx into that idea.
The reason why it took me 4 tries over 17 years to understand Capital Volume 1 was Chapter 1. Now, if you read Grundrisse, which he wrote for himself, he already trashes all these liberal theories, and especially their theories of money. And then he starts out in chapter 1, making out somehow that Adam Smith was right. He actually uses Adam Smith's theory of money as a launching pad for his own discussion of money. And the reason he's doing this is he doesn't want to say just you're all wrong. He wants to show, by agreeing in a limited way with liberal theories of money, because he isn't entirely against liberalism and capitalism. He wants to show, that he can turn those premises into a recipe for revolution. And it's, I mean, this is a very English cultural phenomenon. It's why, you know, in Parliament, people start talking about my, let me not talk about it. When I write a reference, or, you know, I mean, you know, I say something negative about the person that I want to support, so that people will think that I'm an honest broker when I praise him to the skies. I mean, there is a dialectic, you know, you don't start out by rejecting everything. I think the Marxist book is very difficult to understand because of the point that I've made. And that's why I couldn't understand it. You know, Grundrisse is a lot more accessible because he wrote it to himself, but he had a particular agenda to try and demonstrate that the liberal political economy, even if you took it as, you know, possibly, you know, if you just accepted some of its major principles, leads inevitably, according to his logic and exposition, to the overthrow of liberal political economy by the working class. I mean, you know, that's, I don't know. I mean, I think the man has disappeared. Oh, there he is. Yeah. Sorry. I mean, if you want to come back, I mean, look, this is personal. I don't claim that everybody has to work the same way. But I think, why, you know, there's a novel by Ian Forster where the guy says, life is short, Sahib, you know. And, you know, life is too short. Why waste your time proving that someone is a shithead? I mean, you know, I mean, just show me what you think I need to know to make some progress. And that may include, you know, understanding, you know, what, you know, our thought is based on, but not necessarily trashing it.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead, Zara.
Oh, thanks. Hi. So thank you so much. This has been great. Unfortunately, we came out a little bit later, so you might have covered this already, but we're both high school seniors, and we were just kind of curious about how you would suggest younger students like organize and start like doing the work around readings. And like, I know you talk about like individual learning and like self-exploration, but how would you suggest like creating a sense of community around like this, I guess, more radical thought practice? Just because I feel like that's definitely a very individualized experience. And like, I don't know if that's necessarily playing into like capitalist isolation strategies. So we were just kind of wondering about that.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I have collaborated in writing books with 7 people. I formed an open anthropology cooperative that had 22,000 members, which is 50% more than the American Anthropological Association. I mean, everywhere I've been, you know, I've given, you know, soirees to students so that we could, you know, have a drink and talk things over. You know, I've read Capital at Yale with you know, with a group of people who wanted to do that. And, you know, I mean, the thing is that the social context of how we make advance is important, but I think what matters, I mean, I'm sorry I have to disappoint you, because unfortunately they only hand out brains once at a time. And almost everything you think is formed in between your ears. And you should be aware that that's the most important aspect of your education, not finding people to read with or to find some, you know, I mean, if you find a group of people, I mean, what I say in my book is that how students learn is in their informal conversations and drinking into the small hours of the morning, not in the lecture room. You learn more in the free, you know, free floating exchanges with people you know and like. than you do in any kind of, so that if you say, you know, I need a class that I have made, you know, in order to do this, that means you downgrade these things which are actually more important, which are the, you know, not just what you do by yourself, but the many informal ways that you have of learning from people of your age. And, you know, I mean, that's how people, that's what he meant when he's, you know, Rousseau said, you know, kids learn more from the playground and what they do there on their own terms than they do when some arsehole appointed by the church tries to turn them into conformist citizens. You know, so, and I mean, I mean, to me, the greatest thing that happened in my life was the digital revolution. I've been I mean, almost everything that I do now, all my ways of learning, communication, and so on, is done on that. I mean, the scope for interaction and sharing in so many specialized and common ways is you know, the only problem is we have to, you know, do it through organizations that believe command and control capitalism is still the best way of organizing the internet, you know. So, but you can find ways around that. I mean, I just have an email address system with about 1,000 people in it that I like. And if I come up with something, I get onto one or two of them and say, what do you think? You know, we live in a world where time and space distance has collapsed. And we, you know, we can talk to anybody we like. We don't have to be, I mean, I have a daughter, 2 daughters actually. And, you know, she actually was a Hollywood producer who helped to launch Blu-ray for Sony. But now, then she became a yoga teacher. And now she wants to become a creative writer, and she's thinking about, and so she was discussing with me, you know, how can I become a creative writer? And she said, you know, I need to find, you know, a group of people in the neighborhood who I can talk about creative writing with. Well, maybe creative writing is a lone activity and suits my case. And maybe there are other things you cannot, where you know, you learn best by sharing with people who would help you do together what you want to do. I mean, I understand that. But you know, I keep saying, you know, it's the kids, you know, I have another daughter who's Generation Z. And I love these girls, you know. I mean, you know, she went to the best lycée in France. I mean, these kids, the Generation Z kids, they're so much better than the millennials. Never mind the baby boomers and all the rest of it. I mean, they're hardworking, they're political in a very focused way, they're enthusiasts, you know, they're digitally tremendous and, you know, creative, and they get on very, you know, I mean, my daughter, this teenager, you know, went on a holiday to Greece, and, you know, with her class, and I said, well, what did you think of Greece? And she said, oh, I loved my companions. You know, I mean, the biggest thing in her life is whether she's got a good social life. But at the same time, she knows, you know, she's got to organize what she does by herself and take it seriously. I really believe, based on my experience of these kids in Paris, that Generation Z is the only possible salvation for the planet. And you need to get rid of us first, or just do something that, you know, I mean, you know, you know, Greta Thunberg is a model. You know, I mean, so I mean, I know you've been bombarded since you were a baby with the idea that you're incompetent. And that you'll only be incompetent when you've got a PhD. You'll only be competent when you've got a PhD or something. And getting that, you know, subjects you to coercive assholes all the way. You know, I mean, the thing is, you know, I believe, and I'm not making, this isn't a joke. I mean, I'm sure there are other, you know, I mean, but, you know, Fanon, you know, I mean, he got into the Algerian War and he saw what people were doing in the anti-colonial struggle, and he realized that these people had a power that was consistently denied them by racist colonialism. And you have to find your power and who you want to do it with. I'm sorry, it sounds a bit trite, but that's my belief.
Thank you so much. We have to go, but this has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Steve, you wanted to, you were saying something before.
Oh, well, I see that Michael's hand is up. So let me see if there are other hands. Michael, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. This is just this is actually very similar to the previous question. So, but like I wanted to ask it about learning traditions. You use the word autodidact, or that came up in this. You know, whether people learn, which is sometimes people say, "Oh, autodidact, you're learning all by yourself. Will you really learn something?" And then universities are there as this big tradition to learn. Some of us are partially in that, but this group is actually quite a unique learning experience because it comes all kinds of people from different backgrounds and stuff like that. But I wanted to also throw out other traditions like, you know, the syndicalist and unionist movement, political traditions, the anti-imperialist movement that you talked about in the 20th century as those. And what do you think in terms of whether or not, what are the benefits of being connected in some way to a tradition versus being an autodidact, and how do you be both an autodidact
well, I mean, first of all, I mean, I use terms like, first of all, I mentioned autodidacts that I knew. I didn't say where, but it was basically northern working class English unionists, Marxists, and so on. When I talk about autodidacts, I mean somebody who feels that he's got to read a lot in order to, you know, make progress, as well as being part of a union and a left-wing political party and so on and so forth. You know, so I mean everything changed for me after I went to Jamaica for 2 years in the late 80s and met C.L.R. James. Not there, but because I was there. And I was with him for 3 years before he died in 1989. And I mean, he was in fact an autodidact. I mean, he went to this posh school in Trinidad, and the idea was he was very clever and he played cricket well, and he was supposed to go to London, you know, get a degree and become a doctor or a lawyer. And he rejected that and started writing fiction and sports reporting and joining the Beacon Circle and so on. So that he, when he got to London, he was 32 years old. He'd never read anything by Marx. But he was lucky. He went to a place in Lancashire called Nelson, where he went to join Leary Constantine, who was the cricket professional at a small Lancashire town called Nelson, which was known as Little Moscow because almost everybody in it was a communist. And so because of this Marxist local culture, he read his first Marxist book, and he was really lucky because he read Trotsky's Russian Revolution rather than some of the other things that could have sunk him. And in fact, his book, The Black Jacobins, uses the triad of Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin to organize that. Anyway, and he was a cricket reporter for The Guardian while he was doing that. I mean, well, I was with him in Brixton in the last years of his life, and young black activists would come to see him in ones and twos, and they would say, you know, tell me, oh guru, you know, what I should do. And he says, well, you know, I mean, the two of you could start a newspaper. You know, maybe only 2 pages, and then you might find somebody else with another 2-page newspaper, and you can do that. But the thing that's important is that you should write about what you know well. You mustn't think you've got to join, you know, arcane political theories and disputes that you don't. So, I mean, he used to tell his story quite often. And he would tell people frequently, you know, you have to go away and find out who you are, what you know, and do that, because, you know, certainly to start with. So, you know, he taught me by example, you know, and not, you know, in any organized way. And in fact, you know, first of all, anyway, that's another matter. The point, I mean, you know, I was very, very lucky. I was 50 at the time. And I was very lucky to find him at a time when things were changing, you know, the Berlin Wall and you know, the collapse of the Soviet Union and all this kind of thing. So it was, I mean, you know, I mean, he used to tell me, you know, you have to follow your own nose in these things. You know, you have to be, you know, in charge of your own development and your own politics. Of course, you've got to do it with other people. And you know, this was the turning point of my life. I mean, you know, I mean, I became what I am now really only then. And before then, I just couldn't find anything within the world to connect with, or how. I just, you know, but you know, this going to Jamaica and staying with him in the last years of his life helped me to discover a certain style of politics. But it's not, you know, it's not based on rejecting, you know, formal political associations. I mean, you know, I have, as I think Andres mentioned, you know, I've lived in 24 countries. I'm a nomad. I mean, I had this principle that if it doesn't work here, I'm going to move on. I'm not going to adapt to it or put up with it. And, you know, my nomadism was the means of being free. But in the process, you know, I learned a great deal from people like him. But I always knew that I was a loner. You know, and in this, you know, I mean, you know, I mean, I went to Manchester Grammar School, for God's sake. I got a scholarship to St. John's College, Cambridge. I mean, you know, but you know, through being with CLR for those 3 years, I was able to devise a path for myself, which was based on acknowledging that I wanted to be a writer more than anything else, and that's not a collective thing, but it's out of tremendous respect for all the people that I met and worked with on the way.
Okay. I was wondering if there are some other questions or comments.
Nika, I saw you had a question in the chat. I'd love to hear that.
Yes. So my question is a reference to the interview that I took from Keith Hart 10 years ago. It was published. It probably was maybe 12 years ago when I met you in your Paris apartment, and it was an interview in which you said that the war in Europe is going to happen and it will last for at least 30
Sorry,
years.
can you say that again? The war in Europe?
In Europe, yeah. I just wanted to ask you, if you will be willing to comment on the current situation that, you know, people are hesitated to talk about or commenting outside of the big media.
Well, what do you want me to comment about?
I had problems to publish this interview because 10 years ago, it seems totally insane that you were saying, but now it's really, you can read it as like so clear. It's almost like a news that was just waiting to happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, meeting CLR, James, was, and you know, the turning point in my life, and I've not looked back since. But then before that, I was just a drone, really, a lot of the time, or a gambler or whatever. But I think it's a bit hard to summarize. I mean, maybe you should say where you have now published it.
Actually, it was published only in Russian. I translated it into English and
no, but the English version has just been published.
Yeah, you edited that recently, so it was published in academia. I can send it to the chat.
No, look, I mean, it's just that the question isn't focused enough, and I'm getting.
I don't want to focus it. I just want you loose comment.
You want me to do a final riff about the revolution? I mean, unfortunately, I felt I didn't have time. I had a section on a periodization of the last 250 years, you know, which was, you know, 1775 to 1815, war and revolution, 1815 to 1860, industrial capitalism born, 1860s to 70s, and so on and so forth. But it ended with, I mean, you know, what I see, what I'm trying to say is that the one message that I'm getting across is we need to be personal and engaged, but we also have to have a framework of history to work within. And I put a lot of effort into that, you know, so that, and I don't think I can summarize it now. But it ends with me, you know, I mean, I'll just give you the headlines, not the dates, which are war and revolution, industrial capitalism born, national capitalism born, first phase of financial imperialism from 1870s to the First World War, 30 years of war from 1914 to 1945, then a period of about 30 years after 1945, when there was, in my view, a world revolution involving not just the Western industrial societies, but the Soviet bloc and the newly emergent former colonies. And then, you know, from 1980, we're in another 40-year block of financial imperialism. And it ends in 2022. It ends when, you know, I'm sorry, I've just lost the name of the guy who runs the Soviet Union. I mean, come on, give me his name, please.
Putin.
Putin, right? I mean, this happens when I've been talking for too long. So I mean, you know, Putin has launched a new era. And I think it's the next phase of war and revolution. I mean, you know, I don't see any way out of it. I mean, I think the last 40 years have been a waste, and you know, and that you know, a major war is about. I mean, I've always believed that that people made so much from the period after 1945 for 70 years, that so many people gained so much, and they haven't lost much of it yet. That, you know, that I can't predict when and how the next war will occur, but I think it is in the process of occurring now. And, you know, but I base that on an analysis of the last 250 years history of war and politics and capitalism, which I can hardly summarize here. But yes, I mean, I've been feeling for some time, you know, that only the you know, World War III is going to sort us out, and we may not survive it. But I think that's what is happening now. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, but I mean, it just comes across. You can't ask me a question of what do you think about, you know, the end of the world. I mean, but the thing is that I've been thinking about the end of the world for 30 years. And it began, you know, with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And, you know, I mean, you know, you know, I'm sorry. I mean, it becomes very self-indulgent. Maybe it always was my talk today, but you know, I believe that we can't just say what we think without a historical framework for it, and one that is based on all the good advice and previous work that has been done by Marx and Trotsky and Keynes and all these other guys. We have to immerse ourselves in that, and I have. But I only did it after meeting James. You know, I mean, James was the catalyst that made me realize, you know, that I had to rethink my priorities, and that the time, you know, that we were living in from 1989 to 1994, you know, where with the collapse of the Soviet Empire and the rise of the World Wide Web and all the other amazing things that took place between in that 5-year period. You know, that was the form. I mean, before that, I couldn't really believe that I could connect with what was changing the world. And indeed, I didn't think the world was changing very much. And but now, you know, I feel, you know, I mean, my favorite thinker by a long chalk is Lenin. I mean, you've got to go back to Lenin. There's nobody in his class that, you know, that can help us think about how we're going to deal with the war and revolutions that's coming up. You know, as you see, I'm starting to sound like some kind of gypsy fortune teller. I think I better quit while I'm still ahead, if I am. No, but I want to thank you very, I mean, I'm terribly pleased to have had an opportunity to talk with you and to listen to you, but not much, I have to say, because I've been talking too much. And I'm you know, I don't believe that, I think that you know, and I always say, you know, that I don't think I'm Jesus. I could be John the Baptist. You know, the guy who was the warm-up act for the big-time politician. I think I'm the warm-up act for the big-time politician, and I don't know who that is yet. But the people who have helped me to see that are, above all else, C.L.R. James, and reading the history of Pan-Africanism, and Gandhi. You know, that's, I mean, I think we need to be able to place our struggle in an effective political framework, historical framework. And that's what I've spent the last 30, 40 years trying to do. But it's not easy to, I mean, you know, I don't think this current conflict is going to go away. I mean, I don't think Putin is going to fold. And I also think that, you know, the West, you know, the Americans, Europe, and so on, are terminally incompetent and corrupted. You know, I mean, if I was living in India or Russia or China, you know, I would say, well, we've got these guys on the run. They don't know what to do because they're run by capitalists without even decent politicians to hold them in check. You know, I mean, I've been preparing, you know, I want to play a part in this. And I think a lot of what I've been writing since you met me has been prolegomena to, you know, how can we develop knowledge and thinking that will give us a chance in the next big war. And this is it, we're in it.
Right. So should we get some other questions, or should we end on this, or maybe?
Well, you're the chair.
Yeah, I wanted just
it's better always to end with the apocalypse.
Yeah, it might be. I just wanted to one curiosity. Walter Benjamin, in one of his writings, he mentions that he was looking for a positive dialectic of a question. So maybe we can, like, it's an open question. So can we think about what could be the positive dialectic, like of your book and of your proposals?
I mean, I don't have to go to Walter Benjamin. I can go to Marx with positive dialectic. You know, there are times when a dialectic develops and then it starts kind of blending into itself and becoming kind of nondescript. And out of that, often a positive dialectic emerges. Now, you know, I mean, I don't think it's possible for me to say what would be the positive dialectic that will emerge from the mess that we're in. But I do believe, you know, that it's a serious task as a political educator to show people how they got to this point, and leave to other people to say where we're going to take it from here, because I'm 80 next year. Come on. I mean, the idea that I'm going to be the next Marx, you know, is ridiculous. You know, I mean, you know, the fact is I've got several terminal diseases. I probably won't last another 2 or 3 years anyway. And I'm not joking about that. I wouldn't joke about my own death. So I mean, if I die in the next 3 months, I mean, I'm actually going into hospital for cancer next week.
Thank you, Keith, for having shared your time.
So I've ended it on another down point. I mean, the point is positive dialectics come out of the death of the previous dialectic. And I say we're in a period of negative dialectic. And that, you know, that it's up to you, especially the younger ones of you, to immerse yourself actively and theoretically in, and you will understand what's happening a lot better in 2 or 3 years than you do now. And, you know, everything you're doing now is a preparation for it. I mean, I spent 50 years as a scholar, you know, and it was only, you know, when I got to 50, I suddenly realized there was a political point. I couldn't find the politics in my life until, you know, the Berlin Wall fell down.
Yeah, thank you.
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. It was a wonderful way to close this talk. Thank you so much for having shared your time and your precious thoughts with us. And it was really a wonderful meeting. Shall we close it, Nika, here? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. And I just want to point out that despite your disagreement with David, we did have a wonderful dinner together in Portobello Road. So everything was solved. Yeah. Thank you for coming. Yeah, and I hope your book will be like really wide read. We always come back to David Graeber Institute.
It's a lottery. You know, one of the things that I've written, I say, I'm going to die unknown, and 200 years from now, a Mexican adolescent will read something I wrote and think that that his ideas come from me, even though they don't, and I'll become world famous because of him. That's the game we're in. I mean, I hope, you know, I think it's a good book. We'll see.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah. I always end up spoiling it at the end, you know.
No.
Because I'm tired.
Thank you. I'm off to go find a positive dialectic.
Yeah, well, yeah. The positive dialectic is when I found one in Gen Z first class high school students. I mean, I can believe in them if I can't believe in me.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.